Coming this fall from SJS Direct in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. You can pre-order your copy of The Man Crisis today on Amazon.com. You've often heard me say that those who control the money control the media, and those who control the media control the narrative in America. And when it comes down to the people who control the media these days, they're starting to see that their power is starting to decline. And the reason why their power is starting to decline is because they're starting to see that more people are not watching their media, and they're not watching their media on their legacy platforms like television, radio, magazines, and newspapers because of decisions that many of these media moguls made over 20 years ago. Now, over 20 years ago, you had many of these Hollywood studio executives lobbying the Republican Congress of 1995 to deregulate the media here in America because at the time, the laws stated that only one person could own a single television network, a single newspaper, a single magazine, and a single radio station in one local area. And these federal laws were put in place in order to give people an incentive to compete, and they were also put in place to give people a counterpoint so that one person would not control the media in a local area and be able to persuade people to think one way in one area. However, many of these media moguls, they wanted to get more power over the media, they wanted to get more control over the media, and this is why they lobbied Congress to pass the Telecommunications Bill of 1996. And with Bill Clinton caught up in a scandal with Monica Lewinsky, they had the leverage to get this legislation not only passed through the Republican Congress, but signed into law. And after they got this Telecommunications Bill of 1996 signed into law, they then went to start going to buy up small local media platforms like newspapers, like magazines, like radio stations, and local TV stations in the hopes of conglomerating the media in America. And what happened was, over time, we had the formation of what many people called the Big Six. And this Big Six media included Sony, News Corp, Disney, Warner Brothers, at the time, GE, and we had Viacom. And those Big Six media platforms controlled most of what we watched, most of what we listened to, and most of what we read here in the United States of America for a good 10 to 15 years. However, as these media moguls were trying to control the media here in America, what happened was they decided they wanted to get more power over the media by passing legislation to change the way the signals were broadcast here in the country. And this decision to change the way signals were broadcast in the country, this was one of the gravest mistakes that these media moguls made by lobbying Congress. Now, they lobbied Congress to change America's TV signals from analog to digital, and they lobbied to do this because they believed they could get more channels on and a stronger digital signal. And they also wanted to do this because they wanted to make money from cell phones, because they wanted to use the analog signals in order to boost cell phone signals and make money from cell phone signals. But what has happened now is that this decision to change the way media was broadcast, it was one of the gravest errors they made, because after they changed the analog television signals to digital signals in 2009, that's when we started to see a complete decline of the Big Six media, because as they were forming to change these signals from analog to digital, we started to see a second evolution of the internet, because the previous internet, which was out there, was 56K modem, and you really couldn't do much in terms of media. But once cable came into the media mix, we started to see the evolution of the social media platforms and web hosting platforms like YouTube. And once people started broadcasting themselves, they started creating their own content with social media. And this was the ultimate thing that led to the downfall of what many are now calling the legacy media. Because instead of people getting a lot of their content from TV shows, they then just decided to go over to the internet and watch their favorite YouTubers or watch bloggers make their own videos, because their video content was something they felt was more compelling to them and provided them with the information they actually wanted. And they had more incentive to watch that media because the television in their home was rendered inert by this decision to go to digital. And because they decided to go digital, many homes no longer needed to use these traditional televisions or the traditional signal. So a lot of people then went over to the internet, and what further accelerated people migrating over to the internet was the recession of 2009, because the Great Recession, it led to a lot of people winding up out of work. And one of the sacrifices people made was not going to renew their cable. So a lot of people cut their cable television, but they kept their internet. And because they kept their internet and stopped watching television, what happened was we started to see serious declines in ratings for many television shows. These serious declines were due to that, again, people cutting the cable, and many people no longer watching local television shows, because many of these channels, they had sub channels, and those sub channels, what they did was they started to encroach on the ratings of many of the main channels. So we started to see a decline in ratings due to these digital channels having multiple streams, multiple platforms, and also just having so many channels that it led to people just choosing not to watch the mainstream media they watched before the digital conversion of 2009. And over the years, as the digital media has evolved, we've started to see further and further precipitous declines in ratings for television shows, because more people these days, they would rather choose to watch their favorite YouTubers make content rather than sit there and watch a sitcom, or even these days even watch movies. And the damage that is so severe now that Hollywood is starting to feel it, because over the last 4 or 5 years, we've seen declines in box office for movies and at the theater, and we've seen Hollywood forced to release even fewer movies because they continue to lose money year after year. And they're losing money because primarily people are choosing to go to digital platforms. And this was something that many of these media moguls did not anticipate back when they signed the Telecommunications Bill of 1996, or they lobbied for the change from television from analog to digital in 2009. They thought they would get more power over the media. However, they did not expect that people would go and migrate over to the internet. And these days we have people trying to put regulations on the internet now, because they see that the legacy media is starting to lose control. And the first sign of that was when we had that Wall Street Journal article talking about how there were all these racists on YouTube, and the orchestration of what many call the adpocalypse. And that was partially done because many in the legacy media starting to see that they're losing power and control over the media. Now, the other thing that has a lot of these people in the legacy media scared is the 2016 presidential election. And many of those people who control the legacy media, they like to influence how people vote and how people think because that allows them to be able to control the direction of the country. And many of those people in the legacy media, many of those moguls, thought that Hillary Clinton would win in a landslide. And they wanted to persuade people and influence them to vote for Hillary Clinton. That's why we saw so many polls stating that she was the projected winner before the election. And many of those people were in a shock when Donald Trump won the presidency. And that's one of the things that has many in the legacy media anxious because they are now seeing that they have lost control over the American masses. They can no longer tell the American masses what to think on their media platforms, and they can't control the American masses with their movies, with their television shows, with their books, and tell them how to think or how to consume products. And this has really got them really anxious. So we're starting to see, as a result, many of these media moguls trying to find ways to try to control online media because they want to control the narrative and be able to tell Americans how to think. But the decline of legacy media has been going on for some time, and this has many of these oligarchs who control the media very scared because over the last 2 to 3 years, we've seen the big six shrink to the big four as Disney has bought Fox and its assets and Warner Brothers has been purchased by AT&T or merged with AT&T. And in the case of the Disney Fox merger, what has happened is that Disney has gone into a lot of debt. So we may see the big four right now shrink into the big three, and we may see a complete implosion of American media as it relates to the old legacy media, because what we're seeing now these days is more and more people going to the internet, and many of these moguls, they're trying to control websites like Facebook and control websites like Twitter in the hopes of trying to control the narrative on legacy on online media. But what they just don't understand is that the internet is a fluid thing. And just as one website comes up and is controlled by the big six, another one will take its place, because that's what happened with MySpace in 2010. News Corp bought MySpace, and then as News Corp bought MySpace and tried to institute changes to MySpace, most people just abandoned MySpace and then went over to Facebook. And the same thing will happen no matter what platform you create or try to get control over. What happens is the people will just migrate to another platform. And with the online media being fluid, what has happened is we've seen people shift from mainstream media and the big three oligarchs to platforms like Hulu, Netflix, Amazon, and many others to get their entertainment, get their news, and get the content that they want. Because the whole thing with America is that as long as there's freedom of speech and freedom of the press and a free platform, people will go out here and create new platforms when they see other platforms being controlled and see people trying to impose narratives on them. So these oligarchs at the time, back in the 1990s, they had control over the media because they had lots of money. However, they undid themselves by trying to gain more control, and by trying to gain more control, they lost all their control, and that led to the evolution of what we have right now with online media. And the online media moguls, they're making money, they're controlling media right now, and they're creating their own narrative right now. And that narrative, in many cases, is running counter to what they're running on legacy media. And because that narrative runs counter to what's on legacy media, that's why there are efforts to try to silence people who run counter narratives on online media, because that media is no longer controlled by a small group of wealthy people here in America, a small older group of people, and that's why we're seeing a whole lot of complete conflict between these two groups, because you have this old group of legacy media people like newspaper owners, magazine owners, and television station owners. They're trying to control the narrative, and they're going up against all of these people who are online, like these streaming services, many of the YouTubers, many of the bloggers, and many of the people on social media. And that's why we have issues right now, because the whole narrative of American media is changing. The whole narrative of American media is changing. And many of these oligarchs, they are starting to see that the power that they had 20 years ago, they don't have it like they used to right now. And we can see that with the declining box offices, the shrinking movies, and the recycling and rehashing of old content, that the legacy media, its days are surely getting to become numbered, because people just aren't listening to their media, they aren't listening to their narratives, they aren't listening to their viewpoints, and this has them scared because they spent all that money to try to control the media 20 years ago. And the great irony is that they've lost all their control over the media here in America. They've lost control over the narrative, and they can no longer tell people how to think, how to vote, or even how to behave anymore. And what they don't understand is that this was a natural process, but they accelerated that process by being so greedy and pushing through that legislation in 1996, the same legislation that has now led to their complete undoing in 2018. If you'd like to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon by clicking the link in the description box. And if you want to try some of my SJS Direct publications, you may do so by clicking the link to Amazon.com in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.